Good afternoon. I'm Terry Kramer, and I'm the faculty director of the Easton Technology Management Center here at UCLA Anderson. And I'd like to welcome you for this special webinar on the future of innovation and the impact on the MBA education. Now, it probably goes without saying that innovation is critical to almost every organization. Small organizations, large organizations, society, individuals, etc. But getting innovation right is not an easy task. Really understanding where is there an unmet customer need? Do you offer notable value in whatever you're developing as a product or service? Do you have a good understanding of what it takes technically to develop great products and services? Do you have a sense of public policy issues, et cetera, et cetera? So getting innovation right is not an easy task, and I would submit it's getting more interesting and more complex as time goes on. And so we'd like to cover today some of those challenges and where innovation is going, and then ultimately, how does that affect the role of an MBA and what people should be really learning and gleaning so they're on a path towards success. So in terms of format here, there's several elements that we're going to plan to cover. First of all, I'm going to give a brief overview of technology trends that hopefully will provide a bit of context about where in the world are different technologies as key enablers. I'd like to then talk about what I see are some of the leadership implications of these trends. And then I'd like to get into the innovation challenge. And as you know, we've got the winning team that's going to be presenting here today. And we're going to talk about what the goal was in setting up this innovation challenge. They're going to get a chance to present both their winning idea, but also their learnings about innovation. And then this all will naturally lead into a fireside chat that I will have with our dean, Tony Bernardo here from UCLA Anderson, to talk about the role of the MBA and how that is evolving. So let me talk about some of the key technology trends to begin with. And I look at these as enablers. And as all of you know, technology is an area where there can be a lot of hype, and you really want to understand what is real and what is here and now, et cetera, that can be the basis of great innovation. So I would call out four key enablers here. Number one is that we have very high-speed mobile networks that are being built out throughout the world. Fifth generation networks today will get over a gigabit a second. If you look at markets like the US, about half of the US population-wise will have access to fifth generation networks in the next 6 to 9 months or so. China is already, for most of the facts that have been seen, about 10 times ahead of the US in terms of number of sites and coverage provided. In markets like India, there are high-speed networks that are fourth generation in nature. Companies like Reliance Jio that are allowing people that have never had internet access to get it for the first time. The second trend that I would talk about here is the Internet of Things. This is the idea about wearable devices, connected buildings, connected homes, connected everything in essence. There are already several billion devices now that are connected, and the forecasts are in the next 10 to 20 years, there'll be 20 to 30 billion connected devices that all generate information that can create unique insights. Third area to comment on is cloud computing. So this is the ability to store and access information quickly and economically. So large companies like Amazon with AWS, Microsoft with Azure, Google with Google Cloud have created new offerings today that allow the storage of data effectively. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, is the role of data itself, is the ability to access data and to make sense of it, insights out of it, where the data becomes the product itself. And we'll talk in a second about what are some of those products and services that come about. Next area I want to talk about is what are some of the applications, the products or services that have been announced over the past year or so, and their relevance. So if you look at those enabling technologies and look at what they've delivered and what they will deliver, you'd look at things like autonomous vehicles. So the ability for vehicles, whether they be trucks, buses, individual cars, to be able to be driven without any human intervention. Virtual assistants. So think of Siri on our mobile phones, think of chatbots, but now on steroids. The ability to understand the person, the context, what they like, don't like, etc., to create a full conversation for many human interactions. That will fundamentally change a lot of service-related activities. Diagnostic tools and recommendation engines. So this is really the idea in healthcare about being able to develop diagnostic tools that could take in a variety of information about somebody's genetic background, about their current health state, about the status of clinical trials, and to be able to better diagnose and ultimately predict somebody's health condition. Same thing would go on a lot of variety of business services, recommendation engines that Amazon would use or Netflix would use that can better predict what somebody needs and wants based on who they are, where they are, what they've bought, etc. Next area would be quint plays. So when you look at players like in the US here, AT&T, who's bought Time Warner and DirecTV, the ability to see this convergence between telecom, media, and the internet so that you can have one-stop shopping to a variety of services, basic voice services, high-speed internet services, pay TV services, mobile services, and ultimately content, again, contextualized to the user. Another area of major innovation happening is the next billion internet users. So we often forget that there are about 3 billion people in the world that don't have internet access. They may have a basic feature phone, but they don't have internet access. And so there's a variety of new services, some of which are satellite-based, some of which are mobile carrier-based, some of which are balloon-based that can provide remote areas of the world economic access to the internet. And I wouldn't be covering or doing justice to the topic without talking about some of the technologies and applications that are especially relevant today in the environment of COVID-19. So the first area would be contactless applications. More and more, the view is that people are not going to want to touch things, to sign receipts, to do authentication to enter a building. More and more, the view is there's going to want to be facial recognition and technologies that would recognize who we are without making contact. Security would be another area. So in something as basic as video conferencing, knowing that's being used more and more, the ability to secure applications, healthcare applications with connected devices requiring security would be another area. And then finally, last mile delivery. The fact that people more and more are going to not want to go to a retail location. They're going to want to have delivery. And remember, again, they're not going to want to make physical contact in many cases with somebody that's delivering goods or services. And so really figuring out how do you manage that last mile delivery. So what are the implications of all of this? And I want to start out with the business implications, because this, again, will lead into the thought about how is innovation shifting over time and what are the requirements for leaders here. The first business implication of the innovation that I've mentioned is there's more and more a shift from hardware to data and software in terms of value creation. Understanding data and information, especially in a predictive way, is often how a lot of new areas of innovation are evolving. The second thing is that data, if you were to look back 2 or 3 years ago, when people would refer to data, they would refer to in what I would call a past tense basis. They would look at something that already has occurred and try and understand the past. More and more data is being used to predict. So recommendation engines, diagnostic tools, autonomous vehicles that can predict motions, can predict needs of people, etc. That is creating huge value in data itself. A third area is the growth in digital and immersive experiences and less human contact. Interestingly, that line I shared 6-9 months ago before the coronavirus, because that was a natural trend of e-commerce, virtual reality, augmented reality, etc. it has taken a new life in and of itself, a discontinuity of growth where more and more people are going to want a digital experience and less human contact. All of these things are going to create more and more threats to middlemen. What are the middlemen? Are people that drive vehicles, whether people that work in call centers, whether this is people that are involved in repair type activities. This is a threat to society in terms of employment and something to be dealt with in the midst of some very exciting areas of innovation. A drive towards asset-free, ultra-efficient asset management. So the shared economy has been a big area of growth. Uber, Lyft, Airbnb. Now, this is an example where in the last couple of months, this sector has gone through a big decline because people don't want to be next to others sharing assets. But I believe this will be an area that will reverse the trend and grow. And matter of fact, areas like autonomous vehicles will create more sense of security and well-being in that application. And then the final application I would just refer to here is more and more that there's going to be voice-based access to the internet, less texting and typing. So these are all business implications of innovation, how innovation is changing and more how innovators have to think about their future direction. The next implication I would highlight here are public policy implications. So first of all, on the plus side, and you're going to see it from the team that's going to present here, the role of technology that can address broad societal needs. So areas like healthcare, education, and transportation, where ultimately technology can lower costs and improve outcomes. This is the classic work that Clay Christensen at Harvard Business School was focused on. When you hear the term Big Bang disruption, these are really, really exciting applications of technology-based innovation. But with all the greatness there are a variety of tech-lash issues that I've listed below. Data privacy issues. Are people going to be willing to share their data? Antitrust issues. More and more, there's a flight to scale. If you remember from the webinar last week where we had 3 of our alums talk about disruptions, one of the speakers mentioned a flight to scale with the big technology companies. That more and more winners you're seeing aggregation in big companies. So antitrust concerns, truth in media concerns that have happened with companies like Facebook. The future of work, which I actually feel is one of the most worrisome areas, where at best there'll probably need to be a repurposing of workers and maybe relocation. At worst, job losses because of a lot of automation that occurs. And then ultimately income divide, a global divide, and then internet access globally. So public policy is a force to be reckoned with in areas of innovation more and more that weren't even a year or 2 ago. And then finally, the leadership implications of innovation. And so first of all, I was kind of thinking in the environment of technology-based innovation, there's a bifurcation of outcomes. There are more and more winners and losers that are being created. And the winners are creating huge benefit, again, using data, improving healthcare outcomes, et cetera. But you also have destruction of industries across multiple sectors, financial services, education, retail, et cetera, et cetera. You also have business models that are shifting. So in essence, how do people make money doing what they do? And what we're seeing is there's a general shift to more outcomes-based business models. There's a general shift to more scale-oriented plays. There's a general shift towards being a first mover because getting data in many cases requires this. Another area, and we're going to talk about this during the fireside chat with our dean, is a growing interdisciplinary nature of innovation, that more and more developing products and services in a silo. And that silo, by the way, could be at UCLA, it could be at any institution, it could be nationally, it could be globally. Working in silos generally does not create the best of products and services in this environment. And so that ability to work across disciplines is absolutely critical. Changing competitive positions. We used to always learn in business schools that think about your existing competitors. What market share do you have? Who's getting incremental share, et cetera? More and more what matters now are new competitors, people that don't have experience in your industry, that come in across industry, that come in laterally, and they disrupt industries. So Google Health would be an interesting example, and Amazon Care would be another. And a lot of their work is very early and proprietary, but the ability to use data to change outcomes in healthcare will be a fascinating development. Next item to reference here, again, for a leadership implication, is the role of technology in society. Is technology being tapped to truly help societal needs? And is technology being managed effectively so it doesn't hurt society in the process of innovation occurring? Ultimately, dealing with a growing techlash is a big area of leadership implication. So in a nutshell, incredible, exciting opportunities in technology-based innovation that will fundamentally change our lives, but a whole host of issues in making that innovation happen, and a whole host of issues in making sure the negative externalities are dealt with. So that then leads us into our innovation challenge at the Easton Center. So one of the things that we said is, as the Easton Center, which is focused very much on leadership preparedness in a tech-driven world, is how do we advance this kind of innovation imperative? And so we launched last year an innovation challenge that had two goals associated with it. The first goal was to have teams identify promising use of technology that can address a societal need. So really getting people to think about how technology can be part of innovation and can be part of great products and services that help society. The second goal of the innovation challenge was to create leadership learnings out of the innovations that occur. You know, as a great academic institution, one of the goals of UCLA is to make sure that we're developing and empowering the next generation of innovators, of leaders, et cetera. So making sure that as we see great submissions on this innovation challenge and saying, what is it that teams have learned in this area about how do you work across boundaries? How do you identify big societal needs? How do you go serve those needs most effectively so that the next groups can do better and better and better is one of our goals. So in terms of the construct of this innovation challenge, there were several prompts that went along with the innovation challenge. The first is that the problem needs to be focused on healthcare. And healthcare we are likely going to be staying with for at least a couple of years or so because the opportunities are great. And that healthcare solution needs to use one of the foundational technologies. So whether it's artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, the Internet of Things or blockchain, it needs to be using one of the foundational technologies. Each of the teams has to have 3 to 5 participants. And most importantly, they've got to be across campus. It cannot be siloed in any one school. And so we set up a criteria here that 2 members from Anderson, at least 1 member from the School of Medicine, Engineering, Public Policy, or Public Health. And as you're going to see from our winning team, huge representation from the medical school and a lot of kind of engineering sciences mixed with the business school that I think has been kind of fundamental to their insights here. Their judging criteria included the use of technology, the degree to which there's real strong innovation that's going on, the feasibility of the idea, and the ultimate measure of societal impact. Is this really going to help society? We were delighted to see that there were 11 teams that competed in front of 3 judges. There's a biodesign group at UCLA that was a key partner of ours here. And these 11 teams competed for a $5,000 prize last February. I've listed here, this is going to be on 2 slides, the types of teams that submitted. All of them were outstanding. I was blown away when I listened into their presentations. So you'll see on the second column there the types of ideas that were generated: blood diagnostic tools, exercise trackers, early cancer detection, health tracking during pregnancy, ways to reduce costs for joint replacements, the ability to evaluate brain swelling, which you're going to hear about in a minute, and then look at the team constructs, the type of teams that were formed in the right-hand column from a variety of schools across campus. The next group that you'll see here making up the 11 teams, helping with research experiences, predicting strokes, assigning patients to healthcare responders in the most efficient way, helping model medical predictions, and then value-based care. So a bunch of great teams here. So what I'd like to do now is introduce the winning team, CranioView, who, as I mentioned, did an outstanding job. And let me just tell you briefly the people that are on the team here and their background. So first of all, we have with us here today, Obi Emarua, who's a fellow in the UCLA Division of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine. We have Neil Parikh, who's a resident physician in the UCLA Department of Radiation Oncology. We have Gil Hernstad, who's a postdoctoral scholar in the Clinical and Translational Science Institute. We have Gabe Oland, who's a resident physician in the UCLA Department of General Surgery. And we have Wes Jones, who's a medtech entrepreneur here at UCLA Anderson. So let me now turn it over to the team for them to share their interesting solution.
Great, thank you very much, Terry, for that kind intro. I really appreciate it. My name is Gabe Oland. I am a general surgery resident, but I'm also one of the UCLA Biodesign fellows this year. Glad you touched on not being able to innovate in a silo, because UCLA Biodesign's core mission is to bring together engineers, clinicians, and individuals from the business side of things, business professionals, to innovate within healthcare, which is obviously a challenging landscape. So today I want to talk a little bit about our product CranioView, but also kind of address some of the insights that we have. I'll pass it over to Wesley Jones, one of my teammates at that point, to talk about kind of how to innovate in an interdisciplinary team within healthcare. So CranioView is a non-invasive brain pressure monitor, which is designed to mitigate ongoing injury in patients that suffer from neurologic damage. What you see before you is currently the standard of care for monitoring pressure within the brain, also called intracranial pressure, or ICP. It's important to monitor pressures in the brain because after any sort of neurologic injury, whether it's either traumatic brain injury like a blow to the head or a large territory stroke, swelling will occur. If that swelling continues and is left unchecked, it can actually result in high enough pressures within the skull to compress upon critical structures in the brain like the brainstem, and a patient will die. So what you see before you is actually neurosurgeons who are drilling a hole into a patient's skull and physically shoving a plastic catheter directly through the brain tissue to be able to accurately monitor the pressure. Now, as you can imagine, it comes with serious risks, including about a 10% risk of life-threatening infection to the brain and about a 2% risk of critical bleeding. Yet still, this is a standard of care because it's the most accurate form of brain pressure monitoring. So there are about 900,000 individuals every year within the US that actually have severe enough neurological injury that it warrants some form of monitoring. However, shockingly, only 13% of these 900,000 patients end up getting some form of neurologic monitoring. A large reason for this is, as I discussed before, the invasive monitoring comes with serious risks to the patient's health. There are non-invasive forms of monitoring, but these forms of monitoring are simply too inaccurate at the current time to be able to guide clinical decision-making. So it's about a $540 million ICP monitoring market, and that is not even addressing the 87% of other people who should get some form of monitoring that don't. And so our solution, CranioView, is a continuous, non-invasive intracranial pressure monitor. It has a hardware component that looks a lot like the glasses I'm wearing right now, that has two ultrasound probes that look towards behind either eye to look at structures that are known to fluctuate and change along with changes in intracranial pressure. The key to our technology is the machine learning algorithm that is able to process the ultrasound images that are fed into it, to be able to extract key features from those images and be able to give a reliable estimate of intracranial pressure. So this is part of a end-to-end solution that has a bedside monitor that displays the intracranial pressure. And what's really critical about our technology is, rather than simple ultrasound technology for looking at the back of the eye, which is something that's been used for about the last 10 years, that requires a very experienced operator, several minutes just to get a single data point to understand whether brain pressure is high or brain pressure is normal. And that's simply not good enough in our current data-centric healthcare system, which in the intensive care units is obviously critical in understanding trends over time in a patient's brain pressures, which can fluctuate on a moment-to-moment basis. So with our technology, we're able to continuously monitor pressures in the brain, be able to display this to bedside providers, and even be able to set up push notifications so that if a provider needs to walk away from the patient bedside, that they can still be aware of everything that's going on with that patient's condition, even once they're not there. By being able to continuously monitor pressures in the brain, not only do we avoid those invasive procedures like I showed in that first slide, but also it allows physicians to intervene earlier in being able to mitigate ongoing intracranial injury. So the vast majority of our value proposition actually comes from reduction of complications. And so that results in savings to both the payer and the provider in this instance. There are also additional revenue streams from being able to bill for using these advanced technologies. We've set our price point to be at a fairly low rate intentionally so that we can get our foot in the door on a nationwide scale with by engaging key opinion leaders and having a price point that hospitals are willing to purchase, because the return actually results in a break even at around 30 days when this device has an average life cycle of about 4 years. And so obviously we've done this intentionally because we want our technology to be widespread to help our patients, but also we want to be using this technology because as our system starts to acquire ultrasound images and data, it can actually feed back into the machine learning algorithm to further enhance the accuracy of our intracranial pressure monitoring. So we intend to be targeting predominantly large health systems that have advanced neurointensive care units, but obviously we intend to spread out into other realms shortly afterwards. So we have a 3-year timeline for which we hope to be obtaining FDA approval for a 510K device, which is a class 2 intermediate risk device. We've set up our funding milestones to match our necessary clinical trials that we expect to get the data that we need for validating safety and efficacy within the FDA. Obviously, there's a lot more I could go into in our go-to-market strategy and our business proposal, but I wanted to take this time to switch gears and actually share kind of our story of how we got here and how we arrived at this need with CranioView, and really understanding where our team of interdisciplinary engineers, clinicians, and business professionals can make the greatest impact, which is with CranioView. As I mentioned before, we're part of the UCLA Biodesign program, and one of the key advantages to this program is it allows us to have unprecedented access within the hospital system. And I think this is something that's extremely important in being able to truly understand the problem that you're trying to solve and be able to see the entire patient journey from start to finish. So these were some of the mentors that we interacted with throughout our 3 months of clinical immersion, which actually resulted in over 1,800 hours of direct clinical observation. We saw patients that were, in the field having their stroke as part of a ride-along in the ambulance in the mobile stroke unit right on site, following them as they went through the operating room, the interventional neuroradiology suite, getting their initial treatments. After they stabilized in the neurointensive care unit for several days, would go on and move to the inpatient wards, the floor, where they would be undergoing their inpatient rehabilitation. And then well beyond their discharge, months to years after some of these patients have had their initial injury, as they're still attending stroke survivor support groups and talking about their ongoing issues that they face on a daily basis. So I really think it's critical to having this wraparound type of knowledge and just a very deep understanding of these patients' journeys to be able to understand where your team, whatever it may be, can make the most impact. And so for us, that was with CranioView in the intensive care unit setting. I'll pass on to Wesley, my teammate, to kind of discuss the rest.
Great. Thank you, Gabe. Now that Gabe has provided an overview of the business, allow me to briefly take you behind the scenes of CranioView to uncover the how and how we got to where we are today and what we've learned. First and foremost, it's all about teamwork. Everyone knows that. Every one of us brings something unique to the table. Our experiences and training range across academia and industry, which is especially vital. As you see, Gabe, Obi, and Neil are practicing physicians in different fields. All of us have engineering backgrounds, except for Neil. We don't hold it against him. Neil and Obi already have their MBAs. I'm in hot pursuit of mine at Anderson. So at first glance, it looks pretty good. These guys got what it takes to get the job done. But in reality, talk about analysis paralysis. Although you have interdisciplinary team and it's ideal, it comes some of the unique challenges. For instance, coordination neglect and slow decision making. Some of those obvious challenges that I'm sure we've all experienced before. And we'd like to highlight some of the lessons we've had through our advisors at Anderson, having a team contract, a team agreement, having all those team dynamics and architecture all set out early on. You might not think it's really worth a lot in the beginning, but down the road when things get dicey and complicated and schedules and we have all these presentations due, you really want to have those things in place so that you have coordination and things are efficient. So definitely wanted to highlight that, and it's been very instrumental in our success because again, you got too many cooks in the kitchen and it gets pretty wild. A last note is kind of personal, and everyone thinks when they start a venture and they're innovating that everyone on the team is all in. They have to be all in because that's what entrepreneurship is. But in reality, there's a difference between being mentally all in and physically all in. Everyone, might think they're all in, but we definitely advise writing down every team member's top 5 priorities in life today. And if they don't have your venture in the top 2 items, top 2 rows, leave a space for family first. Of course, respect that. But if they're not in the top 2 rows, you are not all in. One of your team members is not. And you really have to have the discussion up front because you might be motivated. It might sound really fun and exciting, but you will hit some problems when prioritization isn't aligned as a team. Next slide. I also want to highlight that it's vital to bring in external expertise, as Gabe brought up. Again, work across silo, which is a big theme of this presentation. But to do this, I think you need a good understanding of the innovation landscape here at UCLA. So this is a CranioView perspective. That's my disclaimer in case anybody from one of these 2 departments doesn't like what I have to say. But essentially, this is the second half of our story of how our team got to where we are today. And I really wanted to highlight that it's vital for innovators at both Anderson, UCLA Health, the other entities here at UCLA to realize and continue to support these cross collaborations. Gabe went into it in a lot of extent in terms of, that's what biodesign was established to do. That's what BCO is established to do. They both have a lot of their subject matter experts, and we would not be successful today if it weren't for all those advisors at both Anderson, at UCLA Health, and the engineering department. So definitely motivate everyone. Even though you think you have enough expertise in your silo, branch out because there is a subject matter expert, and the telephone game to the subject matter expert usually fails. So again, I want to thank everyone for allowing us to share our passion for healthcare innovation, and send it back to Terry for Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Very interesting. So first of all, for the attendees, as a reminder on questions, we'll have just a few minutes here for questions. Just go to slido.com, slido.com, and the event code is INNOV. So like for innovate, INNOV. And then you can enter in your own question, or you can upvote another. And whether you got a question for this team or anything that I covered earlier. Let me just ask you guys, let me start out with a question or 2 here. Wes, at the very end, you were talking about the importance of branching out, right? So the whole focus here is we've got to see our way to interdisciplinary innovation, and UCLA is a massive institution, as a lot of institutions are. Any advice there about how to make that happen?
Sure. And my position is rather unique, coming from solely the Anderson side and reaching out to the biodesign. So one of the jokes is that people view the health system as the Pentagon. It's difficult to breach through and get advisors. But I'm definitely an example that that's simply not true. You know, Jennifer, the biodesign program, Desert, super open. It's really a new program. It's in its first year, but it's honestly leaps and bounds ahead of what I had originally expected. Just coming to Anderson, I was actually a little concerned that, because my motivation in life is medical innovation, coming from a background of 8 years in med tech industry. And it was a simple walk down the walkway into the hospital, into this group, into this team. And I'm pretty much the free agent that was brought onto this team, and it's been awesome. So just the main takeaway is, don't hold back, reach out, and understand that those resources are there.
Excellent, excellent. And related question to that, in the idea about scaling here, how do you scale this effort broadly so that we create a multiplier effect of innovation? Thoughts on how to do that?
I think part of it comes from, the simple organization of different events that bring together people across campus. And so a lot of that is currently being done. That's, with the Easton Innovation Challenge. But I think that there needs to be a little bit more of an effort on each of the parts of the different schools, including the UCLA Health, to kind of be able to reach out when they are recognizing some of their bright and shining stars, and being able to connect them with individuals from other institutions that also have amazing ideas, to be able to see how they can complement each other more widely. I think it comes from within and a little bit from without.
Great, great. Tell us about the path to the future success here for you guys. So how should this whole thing play out? What are the milestones along the way? Are you still going to love each other after a year, 2 years of all the stuff you talked about early on? Tell us a little bit about the future.
Well, we already do after the first year, so I think that's a good sign. But I think that there are a couple different milestones that are really key to getting through any medical device innovation. I think the first is really understanding your problem extremely well. If you understand your problem extremely well, you can target your solution in the best possible way. Then the next key critical component is, does your technology work like you say it needs to? And so that really comes with a long clinical validation and continuous iteration on your solution in the hands of the users that need to use it. And so in our case, in medical device design, I really think that comes with clinical trials. But if it's something in the digital health space, it really needs to be out there on the market and be getting early feedback. I think the next critical milestone is probably needing to achieve the required level of evidence for regulatory bodies like the FDA to be able to allow you to take this project to market. And then that may be one of the areas where not as many people in the MBA programs are as familiar with, which is really kind of its own beast, understanding the regulatory process. But beyond that, then I think you start getting into the investment hurdles and really being able to convince other people that your product works like you expect it to. And that's probably what more of this audience is familiar with, I think, than even I am necessarily.
Excellent. Another question that came in here is on your pricing strategy. Are you concerned that you're pricing too low right now and it'll be harder to move your pricing up later? And maybe broadly just tell us about hardware pricing versus outcomes pricing and other things you contemplated.
Yeah, so in general, I think we are betting on our low prices leading to a very speedy adoption, as Gabe mentioned. We think that this will create a very impactful data proposition that we can then sort of capitalize on later on. By doing so, there are additional avenues that we can capture revenue from through a subscription model sort of later on, years down the road. So we're really sort of betting on being that first mover earlier in the first few years that we get to market, that leading to success, leading to a more impactful and accurate algorithm, and sort of paving the way to additional commercial channels that previously may not have been available. But it's a great question, and one that we're still sort of thinking very carefully about.
Great. Another question that came in, how has and how will UCLA Anderson help with your patenting process, getting critical patents?
So one of the avenues that we have access to through UCLA Health, I know Anderson does as well, especially within the healthcare realm, is to the technology development group at UCLA. They've really been instrumental in working with us from day one. As soon as we had a great idea, that we were submitting our idea, even if it was on the form of a back of a napkin, to be able to start identifying, really fleshing out what our idea was, put it on paper in the form of a provisional patent application, which we currently have right now, and then partnering with us to understand what other resources we need, particularly from their legal expertise, to be able to turn our provisional application into a non-provisional patent, and then work to actually build a body of IP around it. So I know that that's not just available to just UCLA Health, it's to the broader UCLA community, because they have a very vested interest in wanting all of us to do well coming out of UCLA. So.
Great. Another question, the healthcare industry is really complex and difficult to navigate. What was your process for obtaining key advisors, and how do they add value?
I think for one thing, and as Wes mentioned earlier, we were certainly not shy about reaching out to folks across the institution. And I think that's something that all of us were just amazed by, how open and welcoming all the faculty in the School of Engineering were, all the faculty in clinical medicine, all the Anderson folks that we met with. And so for any of the sort of Anderson students or alums that are interested in starting a venture, cold emails work surprisingly well whenever you are sort of eager and interested in connecting with mentors, and especially UCLA, I think our experience was out of this world. So we definitely got super lucky, and they've been super helpful in thinking about everything from product development to the overall strategy, and everything in between, short term and long term. So emails, phone calls, everything in between.
If I could add to that, I think from an external point of view, some people probably think of the hospital as a very scary place, but the people inside of it are not. I don't think I've ever been, introduced to as many people who are just willing to share their great ideas and willing to listen to your great ideas and bounce off of them to create something that is really going towards being able to help their patients, because everybody's really driven by the fact that anything that you do in healthcare has an end goal of helping somebody else through some of their most difficult times. So people are extremely open and willing to collaborate within the hospital. And so I encourage you, if you have a great idea out there in the audience and you want to connect with somebody who can make your idea a reality or understand it from a clinical standpoint, don't be shy. Go for it. Email them, try and flag them down on the street, whatever you have to do. I know we did all of those things many times. So.
Excellent. Good. Let me ask you another couple of questions or so here with the time. A couple of questions here have to do with secret sauce. Is how are you going to differentiate what you're doing amidst others that are out there? Say a little bit about competition.
I think one thing that we've been acutely aware of is that we're developing a technology that is really based on something that's very data centric. And so there are a lot of big players in the space. You talked about Google Health, Amazon, everybody's trying to get their foot in the door right now that probably have the capacity for, large scale data collection that's greater than ours. But I really think that one of our key ingredients, our secret sauce is really having that inside connection within the hospital and for our product in particular, our customer is the hospital. And in order to get a hospital to buy something, you actually need to talk with the doctors who are trying to convince those people in the value analysis committees in the hospital, who are the ones who are responsible for purchasing new medical devices, that this is something that they want in their practice and they need it now to treat their patients. And so by engaging and kind of leveraging those connections with key opinion leaders in various fields, that's really how you get any sort of technology like this adopted. And that's a huge barrier to getting access to patients to validate your tech, which some of these large scale players really can't do at this point. So that's certainly one area of distinction.
Okay, and Gabe, let me ask you on that, because there's another question about this, about how do clinical physicians view this opportunity to change their processes that they use? Which specialists will adopt this first? And by the way, you described what sounded like a very manual process of winning people over one by one, which usually most tech companies would have a big problem with, because they like virality and apps and people download in 10 seconds and adopt and all that good stuff. Say more about why this isn't going to be a problem.
To address your first part, I think you're astute to recognize that the medical community can kind of be slow in adopting new innovations. And it takes, the reason is because as clinicians, we all like to see a significant level of evidence that your product works and that it changes patient outcomes before it's something that we're willing to change our very complicated practices to start to accommodate. That's the first portion of things. The second portion, how do we keep gaining momentum? I think, you start on kind of a grassroots level with different key opinion leaders, but as you start to get out some of those broader publications or convince the right people, word travels fast. And so people are willing to try new things and they're excited about new tech that seems to show some kind of promise. So
good. Good. Let me ask you one last question to any or all of you. It's kind of a parting question. Fast forward 5 years from now, give me your best guess. Where do you think CranioView will be? What will good look like? What will you guys be doing? All of
that. I think where we'd like to be is with past FDA approval and targeting key opinion leaders in hospitals and people excited about our product, people adopting it. That's really one of the challenges of identifying your customer and convincing them.
Gil, I actually thought you were going to say an exit was already had. You're hanging out on the beach, you're retired. You didn't quite give me the answer I was thinking of, but that's okay.
I'm okay with that too, but.
Okay.
I would like to see a reduction in complications for patients and improvement in their overall outcomes after severe neurologic injury in a way that's measurable. And so whether that's incidence or prevalence or something to get really technical, that would be very satisfying for me.
As an ICU doctor, I actually love to be able to use it in my practice. So it'd be cool to have this hands-on.
That would be cool.
Yeah, if you compare it to today where real-time glucose monitoring is, with Medtronics and the Dexcoms, we hope that CranioView will be those in 5 years from now, where continuous monitoring and real-time data is really making an impact.
Excellent. Excellent. Hey, well, listen, in closing, let me just thank you guys and congratulate you. You're the first team in this, and as you know, there were a lot of terrific teams, but you stood out. And we just wish you all the luck and thank you for the learnings to the school and really kind of seeding future innovators. That will help everybody. It helps the school, it helps the community, it helps society. So a big thank you, congratulations, and feel free to stay on. We're going to talk to Tony next.
Thank you, Professor Kramer.
Yeah, thank you for yours.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Good. So I want to shift gears now, and we're now going to talk to our dean, Tony Bernardo. And by the way, Tony, for those of you who haven't met him, he's one of the best people to work with. I've become a gigantic fan of his from the first time I met him. And we're going to find out what his first less than year in office has been like, which is going to be a book he's going to write at some point in the future, I'm sure. But Tony has been with the school for about 25 years. He's been on the finance faculty. He's won teaching awards. He's done some very interesting research on the capital markets. He got his undergraduate degree at the University of Western Ontario, PhD at Stanford in economics. And as I mentioned, it's been just a thorough pleasure to work with. So Tony, first of all, just a big welcome to you.
Thanks. And it was wonderful to hear the presentation by CranioView. As you'll see when I talk about our priorities, they embody almost all of them. So it was fantastic to hear. Congratulations.
It's a great team. It's a great team. So Tony, let me ask you some questions and then we're going to go to Slido afterwards. But I've got to start out on, you've only been in the role for less than a year. You were starting to develop
less
all these
than a year?
Less than a year. It feels like it's 20 now, right? You're only 25 years old, but you look a little older than that.
Yeah.
And so, you had some initial priorities and then COVID-19 hit. Tell us what your first less than year has been like and what's on your mind now.
So thanks, Terry. Thanks. Hello, everyone. And I hope you're all well and healthy. And we, obviously the recent months have been incredibly challenging, but at the same time, it's actually, and I've said this in many other places, I think it's the proudest I've ever been to be part of the community. If you think about the magnitude of the challenge that we faced just a couple of months ago, completely moving from an in-person learning to remote learning, transferring our workforce to basically workforce that is at home, the challenges that our students face in terms of careers and so on, and having to marshal resources in order to support them, and on and on and on. And we all, collectively came together and I think did really a wonderful job given the circumstances. And I'll say that I had an inkling that this would happen before COVID. Not I had an inkling about COVID, but when I first started as dean, one of the first things I did is I reached out to the community, students, faculty, staff, alumni. I traveled the country, and what I really learned is that there's this incredibly deep feeling and affection and love for the school. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that we rose to the challenge. And I think it's because fundamentally we care so much about the place. And then, when the COVID came around, I think, an initial reaction that one might have is, well, how do we manage? How do we just sort of get along? But I think that's really a big mistake. We identified some strategic priorities before this crisis emerged, and I think it would be a terrible mistake not to pursue them. I think this is a phenomenon. This is going to be obviously a very challenging time, but we will emerge from it. I don't know when, but we will emerge from it in a relatively short period of time. And when we do, we have to be in a position to be excellent, and we have to be in a position to really be distinctive in areas where we believe we need to create advantage in the future. And if we wait and wallow, we won't achieve excellence. So I actually believe this is a time of great opportunity, and we need to seize it.
Mm-hmm. And Tony, say a bit more. Before COVID-19 started out, you were focused on a lot of work cross-campus, interdisciplinary efforts, et cetera. Say a little bit about what your priorities were before COVID, and then when COVID hit, is your mindset as some of those things need to be kind of temporarily suspended? Are they accelerated? Some of them go away? Just say a little bit more how COVID has kind of changed the priorities.
Yeah, so I've been speaking a lot about what I think are the key priorities for the school, and briefly, it's where technology intersects with media, with finance, with education, with healthcare, with where data and technological innovation is really going to be transformative. And one of the reasons I thought that was a strategic priority is, well, there's many reasons, but one is this is where the dynamism is in the region. This is where the dynamism really is more broadly than the region and the state. And this is where our students want to go as far as their careers go. A decade ago, only 10 or 12% of our students went into technology-related fields. Now a third of them do. And I think that puts us among the top 3 or so schools in the country. So this is where the action is. This is where our students want to be. And this is where we have tremendous competitive advantages, because not only do we have the strength of the region, but we have these incredible assets across campus, incredible schools and departments, which are leaders in research and teaching. And we really need to think of those as valuable complementary resources. And take for example the medical school and broadly UCLA Health. They're arguably the finest school in the West, one of the surely top 2 or 3 in the entire country. They're contiguous to they're in the campus, which is not common, for example, at many universities. And for us to not take advantage of that possible relationship, I think is a huge strategic mistake. So if you take where our students want to be, where there's dynamism, and the fact that we can work with these incredible partners across campus, this is to me an almost obvious way forward. Now there's other I think areas that we've talked about a lot, and nothing has changed. In fact, if anything, it's been accelerated. There's really a fundamentally different role that leaders are playing and that firms are playing going forward in our society. And I think there's 2 distinct set of issues, some of which you've already talked about. We had for a long time a relatively simple view that the only objective of a firm is to maximize shareholder value, and that's really being questioned. The Business Roundtable, for example, earlier this year, late last year, basically, the top CEOs in the country signed on to a statement saying that leaders have to be mindful and include in their objective the preferences of other stakeholders. So managing in a world where you have to think about the values and preferences of a wide variety of stakeholders is extraordinarily challenging compared to just thinking about one stakeholder in a relatively narrow financial way of measuring your performance. Also, if you think about and you've already touched on this, if you think about all these emerging technologies that are going to become available, there's really remarkable scope for improving our lives, making our lives better. But at the same time, with some of these technologies, there are boundaries that maybe we haven't fully thought through how comfortable we are crossing those boundaries. So, issues of data privacy, for example, you can easily think of examples in health where if we had access to everybody's data, we could make great improvements in people's health and well-being, but that might come at some cost. Where are we willing to where are we willing to strike that balance? And different societies around the world are coming down differently on where the appropriate balance are. And that's incredibly important for us to bring into our curriculum and to train our leaders, because these are the kinds of things they'll have to grapple with. Sorry. And let me just say one more thing, because this is very much consistent with what I just mentioned and the presentation we just saw with CranioView, which is I've always felt that as part of UCLA, this great public institution, we should more fully embrace our public mission. We should be thinking about research and teaching and innovation that serves society, not simply has the highest ROI. Again, that's it's an important, but it's a narrower measure of value than I think we should be considering, especially at a place like UCLA, the greatest public institution of higher learning in the United States. So when I see teams like CranioView, I think they're doing all the things that I would hope we would do more of. There's innovation, there's but also where technology serves society. And I think that's part of our broader mission.
So Tony, as you referenced some of these broad goals, the public mission, the interdisciplinary nature of innovation and working together, et cetera, tell us about the levers that you feel you've got. How much of this is altering the curriculum? How much of this is innovation challenges? How much of this is changes, enhancements to research? Tell us the levers you feel like you'd want to kind of press on to advance these.
Well, it really is all of them, but I will say the one area that and I've heard this a lot, and it is really all of them, but the one that I've really talked a lot about is experiential learning opportunities, groups that bring together students and researchers across campus. I really believe that fundamentally the biggest problems we face as society they're fundamentally cross-disciplinary. If you think about, and we've been talking about healthcare, but if you think about other significant major societal problems we face around, say, homelessness, those are fundamentally cross-disciplinary. You've got mental health, you've got affordable housing, you've got public policy, law. They touch so many different areas. And if you ask, what do universities fundamentally do better than almost any other institution, or what should they fundamentally do better than any other institution? It's fundamentally cross-disciplinary. That's what we do. That's what we do better. There's lots of think tanks. There's lots of other sort of places that do research and teaching and so on. But what do we fundamentally do better? It's cross-disciplinary. And for reasons that we can get into for hours, it's hard to do that. And we have to break down the barriers that that exist in our organizations, the silos, because if you think about climate change, sustainable business practices, alternative energy, homelessness, healthcare innovation, these are all fundamentally cross-disciplinary problems.
Yeah, and so that's a fascinating leadership question in and of itself. So how do you achieve the cross-disciplinary? Is it putting forward a vision that people can galvanize around? Is it an issue of resource allocation? Is it incentives? How do you kind of manage that from a leadership standpoint?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm working my way through it. I don't have all the answers, but I will say that one of the things that I've been thinking about is you've got to demonstrate in small ways that you can accomplish things, and then it will build from there. Obviously, we have bigger ambitions, but I do think we have to start with smaller partnerships, show that they can work, and then build from there. And biodesign is an example of that. I think you build momentum. Let's be honest. I'm not the first person to say that fundamental issues of society facing society are cross-disciplinary. Everybody says that. And across the country, across the world, some universities do it much better than others. And one of the things I've been trying to do is to try to learn from them how they broke down those barriers. But in the meantime, while we sort of work our way through that, we need to show that we can work together and achieve things that we otherwise couldn't do. And I think that builds a momentum of its own. But it's a web for sure.
Yeah.
I'm trying to sort my way through it.
Yeah. Let me start asking some of the questions on Slido, because we got quite a few, and I'll weave in my own, etc. There's a variety of questions on the MBA experience and the MBA curriculum itself. And some of them are more immediate questions, like ones from a prospective student. There's apparently downsides to COVID's impact on the MBA experience. However, are there upsides? And then tell us from there what the MBA experience, how it might look in the future if you're successful with these things.
So one of the things that we clearly are looking into are the longer run implications of the use of technology for work and learning. I mean, we made a very rapid transition to a remote learning modality. But really, fundamentally, what did we do? We did the best we could in a short period of time, taking the content we had and figuring out how to, in a short order, do it in a remote fashion. But what we've learned is first of all, I'll say there's many things we've learned. One is, in some classes, this works relatively well. In fact, in some cases, it works very well. And this is without having a lot of time to prep for it. The second thing is the amount of innovation that we're seeing in teaching methods and so on is extraordinary. we've been doing remote teaching at Anderson for many years, largely through our executive MBA and fully employed MBA program. We've been doing remote teaching as part of those programs. I think it's fair to say we've seen more innovation in our teaching methods in terms of remote learning in the last 2 months than we did in the 6 or 7 years combined. When you have everybody, faculty, staff, students, giving feedback, you know, hey, I did this worked well, and everybody's doing it at the same time. And they're not just doing it at UCLA, at Anderson, they're doing it across campus, they're doing it in K through 12, they're doing it in every institution of higher learning and every work environment. And so this is an explosion of innovation. And the idea that this isn't going to have an impact on how we do learning and work in the future, I think is almost crazy. The fact that we might file this in a folder and say the next time there's a virus or a pandemic, we'll pull this out. It's not what's going to happen. The other thing that's going to happen is companies, large and small, are going to respond to the obvious incentives, and there's going to be extraordinary innovation in collaboration tools and so on. Microsoft, Facebook, Google, all these companies are working on it right now. In fact, you know, I say this half jokingly, everybody was buying Zoom, you know, when this broke out. And I thought, actually, you want to do the opposite. They've got the biggest target on them because every deep-pocketed company in the world is trying to think of how to do it better. And so you've got to think in a couple of years that the tools we have for doing this, our work and learning, are going to be a lot better. Well, you put that all together, and you have to think this is an important part of our future. And how that plays out, well, it's going to play out differently for different schools. You know, a school like UCLA is, in my view, never going to be a fully remote, fully online program. And the reason is simple. We have extraordinarily high quality students and faculty and things that are going on in the LA region that cannot be fully replicated in a remote fashion. That's not to say some other schools won't go that way, but that won't work for UCLA Anderson. But certainly it will become a bigger part of what we do and not fully replace things. And so I actually think this is incredibly exciting, because it also means we have to change the way we prepare leaders, because we have to prepare leaders also for an environment where many of their employees are going to be working remotely. And that introduces an incredible number of challenges. And then furthermore, think about how it's going to affect every industry that you might want to get into. You know, there's some obvious ones, like real estate, for example. Maybe we don't need as much office space and retail space and so on. So if you think about leadership learnings about how industries are going to evolve, this is a pretty incredibly exciting time. And if you have kind of an entrepreneurial kind of innovative spirit to you, this is just an almost unbelievable period of where we're going to see, I believe, remarkable innovation. And we need to prepare leaders and create experiential learning opportunities for our students that allow them to excel in this new environment.
Yeah, Tony, would it be trite to say, you know, the importance of getting an MBA now is even greater than it might have even been 10 or 20 years ago?
I couldn't agree more. I actually think the debate on this is misplaced. I think the value of an MBA has never been higher. In fact, the career data shows this. If you look at career earnings of our students when they graduate, they're growing at a rapid rate. The problem is, from the point of view of the industry, is the cost of an MBA education is going up faster. It's not that in my view, that the MBA isn't valuable. In fact, I think it's more valuable than it's ever been. It's that the value proposition of an MBA is weak. And that's because we haven't innovated in a way to keep costs down. And so in my view, there's no better time really to get an MBA, but we collectively, you know, as an industry, and this is where I think this new technology is going to be very exciting, we need to find a way to keep the best parts of an MBA experience, but bring the cost down. So I've always thought it's really been sort of misplaced at least in the mainstream business press, where they keep talking about, why get an MBA? What is the value of an MBA? Yeah, there's certain industries where that's may or may not be out of favor, but overwhelmingly, if you look at the aggregate data, employers are willing to pay a lot for MBAs, and that's because they have a lot of value. But we have to work on the ROI side of it. I think that's
Yep.
kind of my view of where the industry is.
So Tony, as a former strategist, basically if you say, hey, listen, higher education is a high fixed cost business.
Yep.
The way you drive down costs is by more volume, more scale, drive down per unit costs, go more national, whatever it would mean for us. Is that kind of the strategy you're ruminating on, or is it something else to drive down costs?
Well, I think there's some parts of education that, going forward, there's some parts that are more, let's say, commoditized, and then there are other parts that are not.
Mm-hmm.
If I create experiential learning opportunities among the group that we just saw present, if I can put a group like that together across from, departments across campus, and I can create that kind of opportunity and mentoring and so on, I'm not going to replicate that in some commoditized program. And that's extraordinarily valuable. But sure, there may be things that we do that we can do less expensively that are close to as well as we do them now. And, that's why I think the fully remote, fully online, is not for us. But, looking for ways that we can I'll tell you, it's not just the out-of-pocket cost, by the way, it's the opportunity cost. The full 2-year in residence MBA requires you to be out of the workforce for 2 years. And I think that's always going to be in demand for a pretty substantial group of people. But there are going to be a lot of people who are looking for alternatives where maybe they're 1 year in residence and the remaining year can be taught in a variety of immersive ways and so on. So I'm not arguing that the full 2-year in residence MBA is going to go away. I actually don't think that at all. But I think there's going to be now a range of possibilities that are tailored to individual needs, and technology is going to facilitate that.
Yep. One of the questions on Slido that's a more immediate one is about the value if somebody's been offered, let's say, admission now, and deferring versus not. Is there a time value to waiting to getting your MBA right now? And matter of fact, what's the school's view on deferring?
So, I mean, obviously that's a very personal decision. If you're deferring, I would believe that largely the reason that people are thinking about deferring is, especially if you're entering a new MBA program where you have, you're trying to develop a network and bonding with peers and so on, that if you're in a fully online environment, individuals may decide that's not a good time for them, and that's completely an understandable reaction. In terms of how does one choose the timing? Well, there's so many variables that come into play there. A lot has to do with the quality of the career opportunities that you have right now. That has to do with the opportunity cost. And so a lot of people might be thinking about deferring because of the advantage of building a network, but a lot of people are actually thinking of doing it now because this is a time when perhaps their career path doesn't look like, it may not progress like they thought it would. And if you're going to leave the workforce, this might be a low opportunity cost time to do so. And actually, if you look at the historical evidence, that's exactly what you observe. When the economy isn't strong, we tend to see a lot of growth in applications to MBA programs. And when the economy is very strong, it tends to be weak. So I think there's countervailing forces. I think it's very personal. A lot depends on where you are in your own sort of career circumstances. But it's totally understandable that people would be weighing these alternatives and might come down differently based on sort of where they are personally. But what we're doing here at Anderson, for example, is we know that a lot of students may be now thinking that this is the right time for an MBA and didn't get their applications in time. And so we've extended the deadline times because we know there are going to be people who decide at a very late stage that perhaps this is the right thing to do. And we're starting to see that, in fact, that people are responding to that. So I think those are the two main, I think, arguments on either side.
Good. Let me ask you a couple final questions here. The first one is kind of formalizing this kind of issue on the curriculum. You've kind of implied that, hey, people need to be more aware of the role of technology. They need to be thinking more about societal needs, broader definition of a CEO. They need to have more experiential experiences. how would the program look and feel different? Are these new courses? Are these more field studies? Just say a little bit more about what those things might be.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and so I'll tell you one thing, a few things. When it comes to curriculum, one of the things that we and Terry, by the way, you've done an incredible job at doing this. We're moving in the right direction. Is we kind of teach about technology and how that how we think about strategy and so on, and we've tended to think of that as sort of distinctly as what's going on in kind of different industries and so on. So if I take my own field of finance, for example, I would teach traditionally a course on financial intermediation, and then somebody would teach about technology strategy and make some reference to what's going on in, say, financial services. What I would love to see, and what I'm hoping that we can do, is that when I teach about financial intermediation, I can talk about why certain technologies are going to fundamentally transform financial intermediation. And that should be kind of embedded in the courses rather than technology being off to the side as this kind of separate parallel kind of set of activities. It has to be embedded in everything we do because it's fundamentally transforming all of these different industries. And so I would like to, when I think about curriculum, and if you use my example, I want students to have a deep understanding of what financial intermediaries do, but then really think deeply about what are the things that technology might sort of be able to do in a more, say, cost-effective way, or not even just cost-effective, more effective way, and be more cost-effective. That's the incredible thing. Some of these technologies do the job better and cheaper. So that's one example. Then I would say that with experiential learning, my goal really is to the extent possible to make these cross-campus. I want our students to be working with students in engineering, public policy, law, health, in the arts. They all are going to, so it's really more of a kind of a design, we think about, talk a lot about design thinking, but, really kind of both how we do it in process and the kinds of experiences and perspectives that you can bring to bear on it. I think that's going to be I hope to see a big change in the curriculum in that direction. And then there are courses that I think that have to do largely around leadership issues and these boundaries we talked about earlier that we really need to do more of. And so I think it's courses, experiential learning, and how we adapt the courses to really integrate how technology is fundamentally altering the businesses that students might be interested in pursuing.
Good. Tony, let me take a shot at summarizing the key points that I heard you reference over the past half hour or so, and then give you a chance again to upgrade what I said or give your closing comments. The first kind of takeaway I got from you is the broad opportunities in business and society have never been more dynamic in nature. Upside opportunities, downside opportunities, changes of all types, et cetera. Kind of that complexity of the world around us and the leadership imperatives have never been more notable. The second point of all of this is that the value of the MBA, without it sounding trite, is probably greater now than it was before, because somebody has got to have this kind of mindset that looks across multiple sectors, multiple disciplines, more complex problems, value creation, et cetera. That value of the MBA has never been greater. Number three, a lot of your work and your priorities are oriented around, as any leader should do, is look at how the world's changing around you and say, this is how I need to evolve and innovate in my own program. And you've already got 2 or 3 things you're working on aggressively. And your final point that I got is, don't forget the secret sauce of UCLA. The cross-campus capabilities that other institutions don't have, the location in California with access to companies that are out there, et cetera, that there's unique things that kind of give us an advantage amidst all these changes. Is that a fair summary of your points?
Absolutely. And, to stress the last point, that is a fundamental sort of way we think about strategy is, we think about distinction, how to create distinction and differentiation. And you want to think about the complementary assets that you have available. And when you think about Los Angeles, and this really wonderful city, diverse city, very innovative, and then UCLA and the extraordinary assets, and then you think about the sort of the emerging. You have to, as Wayne Gretzky, as a hockey player, Wayne Gretzky says, you gotta go where the puck is going. And that's where the puck is going. But the great thing for us is all the pieces are there. And, to just put one more sort of point on it, we can do a lot of this stuff without it being incredibly resource intensive. It's more about coordination. And this is an environment where it might be hard to raise the resources or bring the resources to bear, but this isn't so much about new resources. It's really about coordinating. And that's another reason why, I'm excited about this and why I think this is an incredible opportunity. So, if you look around, there aren't too many places that have those pieces. And, I do think there's other things that come into play here. This generation of students, this generation of future leaders, they do have a broad perspective. They do want to live purposeful lives. They do want to do things that, are personally rewarding and may even be financially rewarding, but that serves something bigger. And we're a great public institution. And we have a lot of students who are here who have aspirations that go far beyond kind of the narrow self-interest. And we have extraordinary challenges, and we have a group of incredibly talented people who come here who are willing to put in tremendous work and sacrifice to meet those challenges. And so we should be facilitating that in every way possible. This is an extraordinary group of young people. They have wonderful objectives, and we should be facilitating that. And that's why I think, embracing our mission when we think about, the kinds of activities we want to support here around, say, healthcare or climate change and sustainability. These are homelessness, massive societal challenges, and there's scope for all kinds of innovation and management to play a huge role in that. And so I would hope, if people often ask me, what would you like to look back on? If we collectively could really make significant progress on some of these societal issues at the same time that we are, preparing leaders, managers, and leaders, and to lead both, for-profit, nonprofit organizations, but really make a substantial difference in our community. That would be an incredible legacy for all of us. And this group that we saw earlier, that they embody that. So I was thrilled to see their presentation, and it's really a model, I believe, for the kinds of activities we should be more engaged with. So.
Wonderful. Well, listen, Tony, in closing, let me just say a huge thank you. Let me thank you for the time you spent with us this evening. And even more importantly, thank you for your leadership. We talked about leadership during this discussion, and, I had my checklist, and you're doing all the things great leaders do. You have a vision for where the organization needs to go. You're thinking about how do we kind of harness the resources and relationships to make this thing happen. You've got optimism that we're going to be able to go do these things amid COVID-19 and everything else. And you've got the human touch. So let me just thank you, a big thank you for your leadership and the impact you're having. It makes my life easier and everybody else's. Let me also just say another thank you to the CranioView team that did a terrific job. You're the manifestation of all the work that Tony's talking about and others. And thank the audience for what you're doing. Our students, as you mentioned, Tony, have got a belief in a better world that motivates me and everybody else, and will make a big impact in the future. So thank you all very much. Have a great evening.